Olá, sejam bem-vindos a mais um Brasil de Fato Entrevista. Você pode acompanhar conversas como essa toda sexta às 8 horas da noite pela TVT ou a qualquer hora pelo YouTube, Spotify, Deezer ou iTunes do Brasil de Fato. Hoje nossa conversa é com a filósofa marxista e feminista Silvia Federici. Ela é autora de vários livros, entre eles Caliban e a Bruxa. Seu lançamento mais recente no Brasil é O Patriarcado do Salário, em que mostra como o trabalho não remunerado feito pelas mulheres dentro de casa é a base de sustentação do capitalismo. Em entrevista ao Brasil de Fato, ela fala sobre a invisibilidade do trabalho doméstico, a piora da qualidade de vida das mulheres e o avanço da exploração na pandemia.
The pandemic is making more visible, more dramatic, more urgent what has been there all along. People have been dying before. Yeah, people have been dying before. But of course now it's very visible. And it's very visible that those who are dying are those who are most discriminated, are those who are most impoverished. That there is we say the pre-existing condition is racism. The pre-existing condition is ageism, the elderly. The pre-existing condition is capitalism. A society that doesn't care whether people live or die, or cares that we live only in order to make us work. So I think that these issues are really fundamental, and this is the moment for a change. I think the question of feminism for me is a question that is very deep. It's the question of a whole sector of the population, whose experience has been profoundly shaped, by the reproduction of everyday life. And of course, not every woman, there are women who have, access to a lot of resources, and they traditionally have had other women work for them. But by and large, the majority of the female population has that experience, raising children, domestic work. Even if you don't have children, you're always caring for other people, your relatives, etc. And, the whole issue of the body, the fact that, women have traditionally had to confront government institutions that have tried to control our sexuality, our reproductive capacity, right? Relationship with men, the experience of subordination. All these experiences are shaping, right, a whole terrain that is not only the terrain of feminism, but it's a terrain that every woman in her day-to-day life, has to deal with. Feminism is speaking to a broad set of questions that are very central to the life of majority of women and have not been considered important or political by the traditional movements of the left or social justice movement. And this, to me, it's its revolutionary character, because the reproduction of everyday life is fundamental for every other activity. It's the support system of every other activity. I think we need a major transformation of social life. And obviously, I hope that, in fact, the situation of the COVID, showing how deep the crisis is, how deep the crisis is in the life of women, and not only of women, but above all, the reproductive crisis that the COVID pandemic has demonstrated can be a turning point, right? Can be the turning point in the sense of promoting, a new movement, new demands, new forms of organizing, everything has to be changed. And I think for many years, like many others, I've argued that the change has to start, particularly when it comes to feminist movement, has to start from the question of reproduction. Because we have seen that women have gone, in particularly in the 80s and 90s, gone to work outside the home. More and more women are now engaged in almost every form of wage labor or informal labor, but certainly a lot of women have moved out of the home. And at the same time, because of the situation at home has not been addressed, you still have children to care for, you still have people who are getting sick, you still have elderly parents, etc. Then wherever women go, they cannot negotiate conditions because they go in a condition of lack of power. So we need obviously a major transformation. We need to construct a society not built around the logic of exploitation, not built around the logic of hierarchies, social hierarchies, inequality. That's fundamental, right? And I think we need to build a society in which we have, first of all, a major rechanneling of the social wealth in support of the reproduction of our life. Today, much of the social wealth is used for destructive purposes. Goes to military, goes to jails, goes to police. We need to rechannel. I would like to see a feminist movement that mobilizes and to fight to make the state, to make the corporation, to actually to reappropriate the social wealth and place it at the service of our life. And at the same time, begin a process of restructuring of work, restructuring of domestic work, away from the way it has been privatized, away from the way it has been individualized, so that people, women, face their crisis alone. We need much more cooperation in the reproduction of our life. And we need to change work outside the home. What is being produced? Liberate some of the time. If you are, have a job outside the home, then rush in at home. And if you're working outside the home 12 hours a day, you have no time. You have no time to meet with other people, to discuss the problem, to discuss what is needed, to figure out what kind of initiatives must be taken to bring about some real change, right? Today, we have seen it every day. I think the COVID has opened up, it's a moment of truth. It's a moment of truth. We see, who is dying. We see that those who are dying are those who are being the victims of most social inequality. We also see that those who die are those most vulnerable because, long hours of work, lack of real, medical care. Our immunity system are destroyed because the food that we eat has no nutritional property. Because the cropland, the crops are built with pesticides, So there's we see what we call a reproductive crisis. A reproductive crisis has many, many sides, and all are cooperating to make our life unsustainable, right? To make our life constantly vulnerable, constantly miserable. This is the challenge. And I think it's a challenge the women's movement in particular, and I mean women in the broad sense, all those who are identified with women's issue. I think the feminist women's movements are especially equipped to address this issue, because we have that experience of what is necessary, to reproduce people, to reproduce our family, to reproduce our lives. I think Marx was so impressed by the power of industrialization, by what industrialization could do once you have, for example, a proletarian state that could use industry for purposes, for the well-being of the population. Yeah, he was so impressed with the idea that industry could liberate, our time for higher activities and et cetera, that devalorized, that was very blind to the importance of reproductive work. It's true that during the Industrial Revolution, domestic work was very reduced because many young women in particular were in the factories all day. At the same time, it's not true, the domestic work ceased to exist, right? But Marx does not see it. And, in the book, I've shown that even when he speaks of procreation, right, he always speaks it in a very neutral way, for instance. He has no idea that there is a different approach by women and men to the question of procreation, for instance. Particularly in the 19th century, when women were dying, of fever, were dying of giving birth, etc. Reproductive work has changed. It's now going to a major process of transformation. So much of their work now is done outside the home. And, capitalism is making money out of the commercialization of housework, fast food, laundromat, etc., you name it. The amount of the wellness industry, I go out in New York, every 2 steps, there is a gym. People. So this is really part of the commercialization of reproduction. Now, at the same time, I think that devaluation of reproductive work, is still there. All of this, as long as they are commercialized, they become a business. But once they're done in the home, they're still considered women's work, or they are considered kind of natural activities. And I think that has to change, because it means that it's taken for granted that people will take on those tasks in addition to working for some sort of income. And then you have lives that are completely consumed by work. And the issue also is companies are saving huge millions and millions and millions because they don't have to provide the kind of infrastructure that allows people to go out and have a job. They don't provide. All the work is done for free within a home. All people have to pay for it once it's done out of the home. You have to pay for the fast food. You have to pay for the laundromat. So capitalism is throwing all the work of producing a workforce. Capitalism comes in, uses the workforce, exploits it, accumulates wealth out of the exploitation, does not pay for the process of building that workforce. All the work is done for free, or is done by people paying, the basic laundromat, etc., their own money. So the cost of the reproduction of the workforce is constantly, at every phase of capitalist development, that cost is thrown back on the workers themselves. And this is why our life was so miserable. They're miserable because we never had any money. Because whatever little money women earn now, if they go out to work, etc., they have some money, but then they have to pay for transport, they have to pay for clothes, they have to pay for food, they have to pay for childcare, they have to pay for the care of somebody, take care of if somebody becomes sick, etc. And the life that are consumed, the time, consumed by work. Women have always known that, even when they go, particularly when they go out of the home to look for employment, their appearance has a huge importance, far more than men. And for women, being presentable, being beautiful, having a good appearance has been a whole job, right? Because part of their task has been to also serve men in that capacity, right? Be attractive, please men. And this carries over also in the so-called workplace. So-called because the home is a workplace, but it's never seen as such, right? So women have developed a whole relation, dieting, dressing, right? Gymnastic now, fitness, all of that. And that is a tremendous amount of work. It's a tremendous amount of money because, and also it's a whole form of alienation, right? You feel very alienated. I know so many women alienated from their own body because I think I wrote about that. You're always looking at yourself and at your body, with the third eye, the eye of the market. And of course, the eye of what the media tell you, women should be like, the models that are being given to us, that we never fit, that we never fit. So I think there is a relationship that women have developed to their bodies that is so destructive. And of course, that's part of the struggle to say the women's movement said, no way, we are not going to accept that discipline. And that's very liberating. But otherwise, men have not traditionally, historically, been subject to that kind of discipline. And that's been really a major battleground for women. It's certainly a turning point. And there's no question that, the corporate structure, the governments are going to use, Naomi Klein was very right. They're always using the crisis to carry out the restructuring that they were planning, but they couldn't do in so-called normal times. But now the crisis come, and now what was unthinkable, inadmissible, now they were going to try to bring it out. And I think in the case of women, in particular, they're going, many jobs will go back, to the home. And so, women will be asked now to be the shock absorber of the crisis, and be home with 3-4 jobs, take care of the children, with the school, with the internet, take care of the housework, etc. And perhaps add another few hours of work. So I think that this is where they're building a movement that is not only resisting these processes, but actually beginning a process of transformation, right? Beginning to make connection, build a connection between different social movements so that there is the strength to confront the state, right? Because otherwise, you're right. Otherwise, out of this pandemic is going to come a new phase of capitalism that is going to be even more exploitative. that, is going, in fact, to create new forms of enclosure, and also new forms of division. For example, between those who can, refuse to go out to work because, and those who have no choice. We already see it, who have to face all the risks that, today one has to face when going to work, in so many precarious and dangerous situations. So I think that this is a moment that will be decisive as to how, the next phase is going to look like. And seems to me the path, it's really for different movements to really come together. It's really to build, a very strong mobilization that work at different levels in terms of confronting institutional policies on one level, beginning with, a movement for the appropriation of the social wealth. And on the other hand, also begin the work at the community level, that reorganization, build a strong, we used to speak about transforming our communities from places that are producing workers, for capitalism, into communities of resistance, right? Communities of, now I would say, communities of transformation, not only resistance, right? But we need to create infrastructures at the community level that allow us to then confront the state, confront the employers with more power and with more clarity about what we want. I think it's very important in the last year, right? We have seen, and now more by Zoom, but we have seen in the United States, inspired by Latin America, becoming very popular, the growth of assemblies, the people coming together in communities to take decisions about all kinds of issues, migration, jails, mutual aid, right? So creating spaces, for instance, for collective decision making. Now that's one element, but also other infrastructure. We've seen a lot of organizing around mutual aid. People have nothing now. Many people go hungry in the United States as well. Every day we hear that there are millions of children. People have no more money. They've been unemployed for a long time. The government gives a bit of money, but it's never enough. A lot of small businesses have gone down. So there's been a lot of mutual aid. But we need to not only respond to emergency. We need to learn from the response to emergency, but we need to go beyond the emergency and begin to see collectively what can be done already at the community level. I mean, the pandemic is making more visible, more dramatic, more urgent what has been there all along. People have been dying before. Yeah, people have been dying before. But of course, now it's very visible. And it's very visible that those who are dying are those who are most discriminated, are those who are most impoverished. That there is, we say the pre-existing condition is racism. The pre-existing condition is ageism, the elderly. The pre-existing condition is capitalism. A society that doesn't care whether people live or die, or cares that we live only in order to make us work. So I think that these issues are really fundamental, and this is the moment for a change.
Você acabou de acompanhar a entrevista com a filósofa Silvia Federici. Confira mais entrevistas como essa pelo YouTube, Spotify, Deezer ou iTunes do Brasil de Fato, ou todas as sextas, 8 horas da noite, na TVT. Nos vemos na semana que vem.